Hello everybody, another day, another Mercedes. Now for those of you who aren't aware, I am currently the owner of a 1999 Mercedes S500L, which I bought as a sort of cheap runaround for the summer. That car at the time of filming is now up for sale. I've enjoyed my time with it, but it's time to move on. Now, if you're in the market for a nice, luxurious old Mercedes, the S-Class is certainly a car that I'd say should be at the top of your list. However, if you don't need quite the same load capacity, in terms of passengers at least, as the S-Class, you might be interested in this. It's a Mercedes CL, specifically a CL55 AMG. On the face of it, the CL is a very, very odd beastie indeed. Despite the looks of it, which I'm not entirely keen on, more on that in a bit, it's pretty much the same size as an S-Class, only much less practical. There's obviously restricted room in the back for passengers, although it's still generous enough to carry 4 adults in relative comfort, and the boot is still on the sort of smaller than you would expect kind of size too. The engine selection is limited in comparison to the S-Class. Mercedes evidently expected that CL customers would be more upmarket types, and so for that reason the entry-level CL is the CL500, which has the exact same 5-litre M113 unit as in my S-Class. Most of the cars in the range are paired to the exact same 5-speed Mercedes-Benz gearbox, also used in my S-Class. This car has a few minor differences and a few major ones in comparison to my own car. This is a 2004, which means that it benefits from a slightly more modern, although still wildly out of date, entertainment system. It's also got a very nice specification. In fact, although sitting in this is very familiar in many ways, it also feels just a lot better. I've got to be honest, a lot better than my own S-Class. Probably the biggest thing is this full leather two-tone dash. The two-tone at the very least being an option at the time. In fact, the original purchaser of this car really must have been a fan of what he was buying, because he parted in 2004 with over 120,000 of your Earth pounds. That's a hell of a lot of money now, and it was a shitload of money then. To put that into some sort of context, the list price for a V12 7 Series at the same time would have been about 30 grand less. These were very pricey cars. One of the other things you got as standard in all CLs versus the S-Class is ABC, active body control. It's Mercedes' version of a system that many other manufacturers have, which is designed to keep the car flat in cornering, and in its later years is notorious for braking in very expensive ways. It's a similar kind of idea to the Airmatic system in my own car, and much of the functionality is the same. So I can raise the car up if you're over difficult terrain, because obviously this is the sort of car you're going to take off-roading, and it also has a sport mode, which I'll engage in a little bit. This car is riding on 19-inch AMG wheels, which are not the standard colours, but they do kind of suit the car quite well. The ride is definitely firmer than in my own S-Class, but it seems a little bit better controlled. In a minute we'll get it onto a more challenging road and find out if it really pays off. In the numbers stakes, the CL doesn't really have any obvious advantage over the equivalent S-Class. It's still a ruddy big and heavy thing. Fortunately, in 55 guys, it's got a lot of power. From factory, this should have just shy of 500, however this car has been very lightly breathed on, meaning it now dynos at about 500 at the wheels. I noticed some of the same issues as my own S-Class as well. For example, the auto dimming mirror here has failed, precisely the same as my car. And indeed, much of this is very familiar, many of the controls are, everything's where I'd expect it to be. Just little changes like the start-stop button on the top of the gear lever is quite nice. The dash display here is a little different in style, but ultimately the same thing, and I actually really like this generation of dash as well. I think it's actually aged much better than the generation that followed, which has a sort of big LCD in the middle and now just looks kind of awfully out of date. This at least looks a bit classy. This generation of S-Class and CL are notorious for being the ones where Mercedes tried to save lots and lots of money. But the examples which have survived are generally in decent condition and are still very quality cars. One thing to note about this car, again in common with the S-Class, is the fact that although it is quite a big car, it really doesn't feel it. Visibility out is excellent and it moves along very nicely, and as you would hope from anything with a 5.4 litre supercharged V8, rather effortlessly. These seats are spectacular. They are supremely comfortable, much more cosseting than those in my own car, and they look awesome. This car is not a Designo or whatever they call it trim, which is some special edition stuff that Mercedes kind of did, but it is just a very well optioned car. Ordinarily, I would be very anti any sort of grey and silvery leather interior, but in this car it somehow just works. And so now we're coming up to a more challenging piece of road. We'll put the ABC into sport, we'll put the car into manual mode, and this is very long geared, this car. Oh, the throttle responds really well, as you would hope. And actually, even in sport mode, it's a very composed ride. Oh, pickup is marvellous. There's a little bit of hesitance on first turning, which is odd, and I think perhaps a quirk of the ABC system, because it's doing so much to try and keep level that it is separating you ever so slightly from the road. That being said, cars of this type you'd usually expect to have absolutely no driver involvement whatsoever, and this one certainly does. The tragedy of cars like this is that these kind of roads really aren't what they are designed for. They are designed pretty much explicitly for the Autobahn. This is the kind of car that you're supposed to be able to cruise in all day long at its maximum speed of 155, limited of course, in total comfort and silence and waftability. As with many old Mercedes coupes, this is a pillarless design, which is very nice. Pulls hard. It really does make a mockery of its own weight, this thing. Now, I did drive an CL55 which had the same engine and gearbox setup in it, and for some reason I'm enjoying this a bit more. Unfortunately, the looks of the CL are something that I just can't quite come to terms with. It's that side profile, it looks very much like someone's taken an S-Class and tried to make it into a coupe, which I know is exactly what has happened, but it doesn't look like it was a factory that did that. It looks like a sort of aftermarket job. I think the bit that I have the most issue with is where the rear of the roof meets the body line, and there's a seal there, a pretty big one. And that makes it look, in my eyes, like a convertible with a hardtop on. It just doesn't quite work. However, the AMG body kit, again, as with the S-Class, really sharpens up the front and does make it look just that much nicer. This car is much noisier inside than my S-Class, but it's still not intrusive. And again, if you're buying an AMG, you clearly want a little bit of drama on that front, and this is certainly happy to give you some. Now, if you stick the car back into normal mode, it'll cruise along gently, and it will even disconnect the supercharger on occasion in some sort of mildly misguided attempt to deliver reasonable fuel economy. On the way down here, this car's owner got an actually pretty darn impressive sort of 26 to the gallon. 30 can be had, but I don't think you really need to be saintly to get that. You probably need to be sort of Well, either Jesus or the Pope. That's the level of saintliness you need to drive with in order to achieve 30 to the gallon. But let's be honest here, you are not buying this car for fuel economy, are you? Sadly, if you wanted to buy one of these with some sort of idea of fuel economy in mind, you are zip out of luck, because you just can't do it. Just not going to happen. The economy one is the 5-litre V8 CL500. That's it. Entertainingly, the V12 of this generation had cylinder deactivation as standard. It was an option on the V8. And if you had the car so equipped, the V12 was actually better on fuel than the standard V8. So, if you want the economical one, buy the V12. Yeah, that makes sense. It definitely makes sense to me. Now, this section of road here has recently been made a 40-mile-an-hour limit, and in a large number of cars I would be currently incredibly frustrated at having to adhere to such a low speed limit when only a few months ago I could hoon through here at a pleasurable 60. But in this kind of car, I can kind of relax. You turn sport mode off, you bimble through. Now the gearbox, when you're trying to tell it what to do, it sucks. No two ways about it, it's terrible. There's nothing unique about the CL in that regard. It's precisely the same in the SL. My own S-Class, they don't even let you sort of denigrate yourself by trying to change your own gear. It's just not an option. And I appreciate the fact that they've, given you the choice here, and that the buttons on the back of it are okay. It's the same box in the C55 and the E55. In fact, the same engine essentially in those, the same supercharger setup as well as the E55. But you just get to the speed limit, and there we go. It is so long-legged that fortunately changing gear isn't something you have to do all that often. And one thing I will say for this gearbox, it is an awfully lot more robust than the 7-speed that followed it. It's for that reason that the torquier, bigger engined AMGs, the V12 bi-turbos in particular, held onto it for quite some time. They were still using it when a 5-speed gearbox was very much out of fashion, but it was such a durable unit that they didn't really have much choice. Brake pedal is fairly soft, as with the S-Class. Again, I think their idea there was that they always wanted to make sure that you weren't going to disturb your passengers in the back. It does make it slightly odd when you're looking at this kind of thing, because an S-Class, you've got a 50-50 chance the person buying that might be the person that wants to be in the back. Whereas one of these, the person buying it is always going to want to be up front. So I think they maybe missed a trick to make it a little bit more driver focused. But hey-ho, it is what it is. It cannot deny its own roots. So the CL, it's an odd car. On the way up here, I was kind of thinking in my head, like, why? Why would you buy one? I mean, it's less practical than the S-Class, there's less room in it, but it's no smaller. It is a bit better to drive. They are better specified. It's obviously no better on fuel. There's no diesel option, there's no V6 option. The prices of them are basically the same as an S-Class, and of course maintaining them is going to be therefore just as expensive as an S-Class. And it doesn't look, in my mind, quite as good as the S-Class. Mercedes really did not help things either when they introduced the CLS. And to most people, that's kind of the same thing. In reality, the CLS is, of course, a far lesser car. It's based on a cheaper platform. The CL is always going to be the big daddy. And so, if you can sort of make peace with the styling, and maybe you're thinking of buying something like a Jaguar XK, let's say, but you do need rear seats which are actually useful and usable, and a boot that you can get a reasonable amount in, then it probably makes a lot of sense. And the S-Class is a fairly common car, whereas the CL is a relatively uncommon one. And the good news is that because it shares quite a few parts with the S-Class, yes, they may be expensive, but you can at least get them. If you're going to go and get a CL, I think really the way to do it is to get one like Alex has, with a nice high spec, because sitting in here, although this is, as mentioned many times, a familiar thing to an S-Class owner, it is just a little bit better in every way. Which of course it should have been, considering how much money Mercedes were happy to charge you for one. Definitely an interesting car. I do, however, think that I probably prefer it over the SL. Obviously, if you want the roof down, you really don't have a lot of choice there, but it is a nice thing. I like it, and a relative bargain, because 10 grand will get you a pretty damn nice one. And believe me, when you sit in this thing, oh, you're getting more than 10 grand's worth of car. Trust me. Anyway, thanks for watching. Hope you've enjoyed. Please comment below. I'd love to know what you guys think of the CL. Is it a car you'd buy? Do you like it? Do you not? It's an oddball car in Mercedes terms, and I guess maybe it's a little bit ahead of its time, because if you look at the sort of later things like the CLS, granted 4-door version, but they sold like hotcakes for about 10 years. And maybe this was just, I don't know, too much too soon. Anyway, thank you all for watching. Please like, comment below, subscribe if you haven't already, and we'll see you for the next one. Bye-bye.